If you're a business owner, no one is more familiar with the curse of a 24-hour day than you. Menial tasks can eat away at your day, taking you away from those projects that fund and grow your company. Unfortunately, hiring is a major pain in the ass. Once you navigate all the tax hurdles and benefits packages, you've spent tens of thousands of dollars and numerous hours without any production and no guarantee that your investment will pay off. This is why Busy Bee's Virtual Services is Stranger Encounters' first sponsor. Bee takes a professional approach, full of passion and zeal for optimizing your time. She attacks every project with the vigor and endurance of a business owner because she understands how important your time and focus is. If you're constantly worried about emails, client relationships, and scheduling your next meeting at the expense of more profitable and meaningful tasks, Bee is ready to assist you in achieving maximum results. For a free consultation, call 337-287-8802 or click on the affiliate link on the front page of StrangerEncountersPodcast.com. Whether you're filling a full-time or part-time position, Bee offers affordable virtual services to minimize your risk and free up your day. Call 337-287-8802 or click on the affiliate link on the front page of StrangerEncountersPodcast.com.
And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
Welcome to Stranger Encounters. I am Tommy Salmons. Today's episode is going to be the first of a series I have been working on. I've been putting a lot of time and thought into how I wanted to conduct this series. There may be interruptions along the way. In the next few months, I might, do an interview here or there just to break up some monotony. But the series will be covering the book, The Progressive Era, by Murray Rothbard, that was put together a few years ago, of his essays and speeches that he had given on the Progressive Era. And as an introduction into the series, I wanted to cover a topic that is important for people to understand. When I don't really consider myself a libertarian anymore, I identify with a lot of the libertarian styles, ideology, but I think there's more nuance to each individual's thought process and belief system and principles if that person has spent any amount of time trying to determine why they believe what they believe and what it is that they are, what they do. But one thing I find is that as somebody who is always at odds with the state, those of us that have the liberty mindset, the anarchist style of mindset, at least philosophically, in a lot of ways, it's like Plato's cave, where we've come out into we've come out into the light and seen the state for what it is, and now we're back down in the cave trying to tell everybody and reveal to everyone that what they've been they're being shown is actually just shadows on the wall, and reality is outside of the cave. And they're laughing at us and they're trying to kill us, you know. So that's kind of the mindset I take, and it's not that I am more enlightened or so much smarter than anybody, because I know some really, really intelligent people that still advocate and defend the state when and when you know that somebody is extremely intelligent and you're having a thoughtful discussion with them and you're debating and you're getting into these topics, it's really frustrating that they agree with you and they see your point, but they just can't wrap their heads around the idea that there is life outside of a state. And it's the same problem with progressives and conservatives. It's not just one or the other. Conservatives tend to view the state as extortion or as theft, but they're okay with keeping the military in place and using force unnecessarily. And progressives typically see the force and the interventionism of the state for what it is, but they want to continue to tax and allow regulations. So, as an introduction, what I want to do is I want to cover what is the state. So I spent the last couple of days taking some notes, and I'm going to be kind of reading through these notes, adding and taking away as I see fit. But I want to kind of define what the state is in my mind and how I see the state. So before we get into The Progressive Era by Murray Rothbard, I want to cover what is the state. Okay? So throughout history, the state has been an oppressive or dominating force. It robs, it kills, it imprisons, it conquers, it steals, it enslaves. That's what the state does. That's what it's good at. No state has ever been benevolent or a source of good. They've constantly hoarded wealth and resources for their own gain. They condemn those misbehaving citizens that refuse to toe the line, those citizens that are like, wait, you question their authority or this, that, and the other. If you tell a cop no, see what happens to you. Just tell a cop no and see what happens. No one's defending you. You're on your own. And that cop doesn't take no for an answer. They don't like being told no. You know, but feudalism, Nazism, communism, monarchs, imperialism, colonialism, wars, famines, corporatism, they're all state-sanctioned evils. These are all things that the state sets out to do, to garner more power and to control the masses. They spend all their time propagandizing people into believing they are needed, as if people are too immature and irresponsible to live their own lives, as if we can't voluntarily work together on a community level, as if my neighbor and I are incapable of interacting voluntarily. I mean, if not for the state, would you kill your neighbor or steal from the family down the street? And if you did so and called yourself the state, would it be more moral? I mean, is that okay? As long as you have that term, as long as you have that label of being a government or being the state, is it okay that you steal or kill from somebody? See, because in my opinion, no person has such moral authority. Yet when it's done in the name of the state, it's accepted and defended. And I don't understand why people defend the state when they can see the state for what it is. When they see the state as a necessary force or intervention overseas or
or abusive in its incarcerating of minorities or the poor? Why is it okay to continue to give them power to regulate and to tax? I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense. If they're abusive in this area, what makes you think that they're going to be responsible in another area? And the defenders of the state worship the powers of theft and murder. Somehow, this cartel of politicians and bureaucrats have acquired powers and privileges no person has. And if you don't have the power, how are you giving that power to someone else? How are you allowing or granting someone something that you don't personally hold? You know, in the 20th century, over 200 million people were killed by their own governments. This doesn't include war. This is just death to citizens by its own government. Over 200 million in the 20th century alone. And yet we still defend these people as if it's some benevolent structure that has some arbitrary grip on what's good and evil, and you have to obey their laws and their rules. You know, they reserve the right to enslave kids of 18 and 19 years old and send them away to foreign lands to die in the name of war. I mean, they still have this power. And I know people say that the draft hasn't been used since Vietnam. No, it hasn't been used, but they still have the power. We have to get rid of that power. Nobody should have the right to just send anybody away to war. You know, they incarcerate millions of people for possessing property they dislike or condemn. They police morality and behaviors. They prohibit acts that undermined their wealth and authority. The worst part is when they've been so effective at convincing the masses they're legitimate, that their benevolence and oversight is just and necessary. The majority of the population defend the oppression and lack of freedom mindlessly, even labeling the oppression as freedom. The freedom to not own a plant, to not own guns, to not be self-sufficient, the freedom to do as you're told, the freedom to not decide for yourself whether or not you are capable of menial tasks, the freedom to feel safe from threats to their power while you lose yours. They throw false binaries out to the masses, dividing their worshipers along lines they choose to make it appear there are choices, but every choice you're presented only serves to honor and expand state influence and power. Whether it's abortion, racism, immigration, marriage, prohibition, gun ownership, voting, military service, education, policing, they're all subjects presented as if your only choices are for the state to permit or restrict or condemn. You know, if you refuse any of these things, if you choose to go your own way, they just throw you in a damn cage. But somehow that's okay. There's no victims here. You just stepped out of line. And as freedom goes, it's none of their fucking business, in all honesty. What gives the federal mafia of your country the authority to determine your choices? Where do they get this authority? Now, by now, some of you are screaming, well, that's democracy. Yeah, exactly. You know, Thomas Jefferson warned us that democracy is nothing but mob rule. It's not a benefit. Just because a majority or a plurality of voters determine they like or dislike something doesn't make it correct. The minority of entrepreneurs become ultra successful. Are the majority of business owners correct in the way they conduct business? Or are the ultra successful the minority? You know, even Robert Frost said, two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference. You know, your majority could kiss my ass. This is my life. You don't have a right to tell me how I can and can't live, as long as I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not victimizing anybody. Who gives a shit? Now, in the last 60 years, the state has done everything in its power to kill its credibility. Operation Mockingbird, an operation conducted by the CIA to use news media to spew CIA talking points, to propagandize the people so that the people are convinced of state-sanctioned lies. That happened. Yeah. You still listen to the media, don't you? The Gulf of Tonkin. The USS Maddox was supposedly torpedoed by the North Vietnamese, which led to the disastrous Vietnam War. Yeah, never happened. Yet, 1,353,000 people are dead due to this lie. Yeah, whatever. Let's still go to war. Yeah. What was World War I was started from the propaganda. They had babies on bayonets. They were bayoneting babies. Oh, we had to go stop. Had to go stop them. We had to go fight World War I because there were babies on bayonets. How about Operation Northwoods? The Department of Defense came up with this harebrained scheme in 1962 to kill Americans and American allies and blame Cuba in order to start a war with Cuba. They would use U.S. military to shoot down American planes, sink boats of Cuban refugees, or bomb Guantanamo and blame Cuba, blame Castro, because they wanted to remove Castro from power. You know, there was that whole Bay of Pigs incident. That was a complete and utter failure. Luckily, John F. Kennedy never signed off on Operation Northwoods, and that never went forward. But all the chiefs of staff had signed off on it. They were all aware that it was all going to be done under false pretenses, what they call a false flag. But, yeah, you know. And you wonder why people question 9/11? I don't blame them for questioning 9/11, especially whenever it's out in the open that Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11, yet the FBI and the White House has done everything they can to limit the capability of the victims' families of 9/11 to go and get retribution from Saudi Arabia. You know, a couple of years ago they said that they were allowed to sue. They were allowed to sue Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia had openly funded, where at least one of the princes in Saudi Arabia had openly funded the terrorists of 9/11 and had been funding Al Qaeda, and so they gave them permission to go and sue Saudi Arabia. But here recently, they've been trying to stop that because Trump thinks it's more important to have good relations with Saudi Arabia. I don't know. Seems to me like maybe Saudi Arabia should be held accountable for the actions. At least the people that were funding the terrorists. If we're really going to go to war over what happened on 9/11/2001, shouldn't at least the people that were funding these groups be involved? Then you had the MK Ultra mind experiments with the CIA was conducting mind and drug experiments on unsuspecting citizens. They tortured innocent people by drugging them, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, trying to manipulate and create split personalities. They experimented with electroshock therapy. There's a documentary, The Minds of Men, who covers this in grave detail. It's like 3 hours and 45 minutes of just talking about the CIA's MK Ultra program and how horrible that was. The first Iraq war, they were supposedly the Iraqis were throwing Kuwaiti babies out of incubators, and the Iraqi military, so the U.S. had to go to war with them, and never happened. The little 15-year-old girl that was testifying in front of Congress, come to find out she's Saudi royalty or part of like some highfalutin family in Saudi Arabia. It's their daughter. There was Iran-Contra with the U.S. supplying anti-Sandinistas with weapons by using Israel and Iran as middlemen. And this isn't even to mention the extensive journalism by Gary Webb uncovering the cocaine smuggling to fund the Contras. Everybody knows about the weapons of mass destruction in 2003. And you guessed it, Colin Powell eventually came out, said he regretted spewing all this propaganda and that it was blown out of proportion. There's many more cases. I'm not going to get into it. The latest of which is the Trump-Russia collusion. And this isn't about taking Trump off the chopping block, because I just haven't gotten over the fact that it appears to me like Trump's in place to create division in this country and not for any other reason. And I think that's the only reason he was allowed to win the presidency. We can't. I don't have the time to rehash all the lies and every atrocity the state perpetrates. But you're defending these people. These are the things that they're doing. These are the lies they're telling. These are the people using influence to curtail your freedoms in order to increase their power. The administrators, bureaucrats, police, military, politicians, and intelligence agencies all working together day in and day out to increase their own power and influence. They tell the public any number of lies using fear as a tool to further their strategy of growing government's role in individual matters. You want to start a business? Buy a license. You want to kill your own food? Buy a license. You want to get married? Buy a license. You want to drive? Buy a license. You want to leave the country? Buy a license, either a visa or a passport. It's pretty insane that these things are essentially illegal to those without the government required fiat to afford them. Not to mention nearly everything is legal to those with enough fiat currency. It's almost as if the state has determined that not holding enough of their worthless money makes you less free, less valuable, less influential, less of a citizen, less of a person. If you have the money, you drive your own speed limit. If you have the money, you park where you want. If you have the money, you go where you want. If you're slapped with a fine, it's just a fee. That's just the cost of doing what you want. You're just purchasing a privilege if you have the money. In the land of the free and the home of the brave, freedom only goes as far as your bank account goes. And the laws and regulations that give the rich advantages in business or affect the middle and lower classes are defended by those they negatively impact the most, many times calling for more laws and regulations. And I read a story the other day about the negative effects the minimum wage increase in New York is having. Any fucking ape with half a brain cell could have predicted that mom and pop shops and family restaurants were going to be disproportionately impacted. Small businesses are laying off staff and seeing fewer customers due to increased prices. Obviously, Bojangles Bar and Grill is going to have a much harder time meeting payroll than Walmart or Amazon. And all we get, the rich getting richer, politicians more powerful, and small businesses becoming smaller and less prominent. In the haste, people screaming and fighting for 15, they failed to observe the simple reality that they are arguing for the corporations they so despise to become wealthier and more powerful. This good-intentioned legislation so many people saw as a solution to wealth inequality only serves to increase the wealth divide. And as the legislation operates to increase poverty and homeless populations, those negatively impacted call for the state to take more power in order to correct the problems the state caused. This is the vicious circle of the state. This is what the state is. They create problems so that you ask them to take power to solve the problems that create more problems so that you ask them to take more power to solve the problems. They create more problems. It's just the way it works. It's easy to become despondent when you see these people for what they are, when you see the state for what it is. It's very easy to just like throw your hands up and give up, because you got relatively smart people out there defending these people, and they refuse to see them for what they are. You know, I mean, all the state is an organized crime syndicate that is only good at stealing and killing. It's been the same forever. So that's what the state is. And this is why individuality is so important. It's why it's so important to do everything you can to learn as many skills as you can on your own, not depend on the state. Because becoming a powerful individual is about empowering yourself, not looking for someone else to empower you, not asking for permission. You know? So now we're going to get into the Progressive Era, Chapter 1. And this starts covering it gets into a lot of the things that I was just talking about. Now, we're not going to get through, I don't think we're going to get through the entire Chapter 1 today, but that's all right. That gives me an episode for next week. So we're going to start off with Chapter 1, Part 1, which is subsidizing railroads. Now, in the United States, railroads were the first big business to be subsidized and regulated by government. They were receiving land grants. You can research railroad subsidies and protective tariffs, and you can see all the different preferential treatment that the railroads were getting. And in the 1850s, railroads had been developed as far west as the Mississippi River. By the end of the 1860s, railroads had finished across the continent, sea to shining sea. Prior to the development of railroads, all mass transit of goods was limited to rivers. Railroads opened up land travel of goods, which was a good thing. So, what wasn't a good thing was the idea that the government was able to pick and choose those people that were running the railroads and operating on the business side. And the way that these people were able to manipulate and bribe their way into these positions to become CEOs of these railroad corporations and become super wealthy and super powerful and have major influence outside of the political structure. This didn't start with Jeff Bezos. This didn't start with Sam Walton or Walt Disney. This started in the 1800s. More than likely, this has been going on since the beginning of government, where you had those propped up by kings and queens and monarchs and put into positions of power, like during feudalism, the land was handed to those preferred by the king and queen to watch over the servants of that land. So in the 1860s, 800,000 acres called the Cherokee Tract in southeast Kansas was sold to James F. Joy. It was negotiated in secret and made no provisions for settlers. He was not the high bidder. Actually, the land was sold to Joy at $1 an acre. The settlers that had already homesteaded had set up their land, was already growing their food, were already farming, ranching. They had to pay $1.92 an acre. So they were paying almost twice the amount that Joy was paying. It came to light that the man that negotiated on part of the federal government, Orville Browning, was Joy's brother-in-law and attorney, and later became a business partner in the railroad business. The original Fed grants covered 200 million acres. Half was awarded to railroads, the Central, South, Union, and North Pacific railroads. None of these railroads used private funds to pay for land. They funneled federal grants and loans into private acts to fund their projects and pay their shareholders, of course. Can't forget those pesky shareholders. The Central Pacific is a good example of the corruption that was going into the railroad business, and just how unsophisticated this was done at the time, and seeing the corporations that are around today and how openly they are lobbying, and it's still the unsophisticated, right in your face corruption, and nobody has a problem with it. Nobody. Well, I can't say nobody, but I mean the vast majority of Americans are just like, well, that's how they've always done it. That doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it right. That's how they've always done it. Isn't an argument, So Collis P. Huntington was the dominant CEO of Central Pacific. Mark Hopkins was the CFO, and Charles Crocker was in construction. Leland Stanford became governor of California. So you had these four Sacramento merchants who they got into bed with the government by getting one of them elected to government. And, it's just the way it works. Leland Stanford becomes the governor. He handles the political end. He makes sure that he has all the right ties to Congress and to the federal government so that he can get all the grants and all the loans that are necessary to move forward in starting a massive corporation. Now, one has to wonder what the railroads would have looked like had it not been done this way. Would it have been farmers owning miles of track that ran across their property? Because the desire for the transport was there. There's no doubt about that. So would they have been able to figure it out on their own? Would the farmers been able to fund this without getting the federal government involved? And they would have made money based upon the shipments, and it would have increased the wealth of each individual farmer, as opposed to just increasing the wealth of four people that are granted the entire structure. The federal government can go into bat for them and cutting them better deals on the land, that using eminent domain to take land from people and to build this this tract. And I relate this to the wall. I read a story a while back, and I'm not going to get too involved in the immigration thing. I think I've kind of covered that enough. But I read a story a while back about some of these ranchers that wanted the wall on their property, that were actually advocating for the wall on the southern border. And they're ranchers on the southern border. And then there are ranchers that don't want the wall on their property. And I read somewhere where the government was offering them like $2,900 or $2,900 for like 1.2 acres or something like that. I believe that's what it was. I could be wrong about that, but it was something like that. It really wasn't that, it's really not that much money. So I was thinking, I was like, well, why don't these ranchers that actually want the wall on their property apply for a loan or do a GoFundMe and build a wall on their property? Yeah. I don't know why they're turning to the government to do it for them, and I don't know. I think about ranchers and I think about self-sufficient people, real rugged individualists. And so it was really hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that these types of individuals are turning to the federal government to solve the problem that they have on their property. Essentially, they're taking property that's been in their family for generations, and they're basically saying, oh, yeah, the government has more right to this property than I do. And they have the right to come onto my property and build. And they're advocating for it. But what they're not taking into consideration is that when they're advocating for the government to come onto their property and take their property from them and build, they're also advocating for the government to go onto people's property that don't want the wall built on their property. And so they're essentially saying that it's okay for the government to violate the rights of their neighbors and their fellow ranchers and violate the property rights to steal property to build this wall. And that's not what freedom is, man. That's not what owning property is. You know? So I find it really difficult to understand that thought process. I don't want the federal government coming to take my land, so I certainly don't want the federal government to go take anybody else's land. Anyway, so let's get back into this. In order to ensure voters elected to give the railroad money, Leland Stanford would have volunteers hand out gold coins to those constituents that voted in favor of subsidizing the railroad. In order to receive the federal charter, 9 million acres and subsidies, Huntington drove to D.C. with $200,000, distributed it for favors, and returned with the charter in hand. So basically, he goes to D.C. and he bought a charter. A charter that, in all likelihood, well, in any honest man's view, was not the government's to give. But because people had already settled the land, people were already living there, and the government just rips it out from under them. And it says, yeah, well, we'll give you this 9 million acres for $200,000, and therefore everybody living on this land is now homeless, without a ranch, without a farm, without anything. But had they gone to these individuals and worked with these individuals and given them just compensation, I'm sure the railroad still would have gotten built. It just would have been more difficult, more expensive, and it would have given the politicians less power. So obviously, the federal government wanted to do it this way, and it made it easy on the business owners. It made it easy for them to get wealthy. It made it easy for them to get powerful and to lobby the government. So you already, in the 1850s, with the building of the railroads, you already have a situation in which your average man and woman, your average family, your average farmer, the average Joe is being oppressed, victimized, however you want to say it, by the federal government in favor of large corporations. So the four, Huntington, Hopkins, Crocker, and Stanford, formed a construction company, awarded the sole building contract, retained $79 million on a $36 million job, and this was all taxpayer subsidies. Not only was this the MO of every railroad of its time, this is what continues today with big corporations and big businesses. Corporations are not a natural state of business. Favors are bought, regulations devised to oppress competition, and taxes are levied in order to enrich the politically connected. This neo-feudalism, like its ancestor feudalism, is a creation of government power. Feudal lords have been replaced by CEOs, monarchs by Congress, land grants by subsidies, and all at the expense of the working man. Even the bankers were involved in this scam of robbing from the taxpayers to give to the corporate lords. Jay Cooke funded his bank on government bonds during the Civil War, selling them to the public by using a propaganda campaign, a national debt, a national blessing. He used his connections to Washington to extort and bribe government officials and become an ultra-wealthy war profiteer. Since the amount of money a bank could print was determined by the amount of government bonds the bank held, Cooke found his fortune through a virtual monopoly of government bonds. And this is how these bankers have become so powerful. It's the same way that Wall Street operates today, that they use connections within government to buy preferential treatment, I guess would be the best way to say it, buy favors. And they get the money prior to the inflation that eventually affects the rest of us. So Cooke went on using his influence to become the sole charter holder of the Northern Pacific Railroad in 1870. He controlled over 47 million acres. With ownership of a bank, the sole construction rights, Cooke was able to, and the sole construction rights. I'm sorry, I'm half reading and half talking from memory. Cooke was able to collect the majority of the wealth from the Northern Pacific with a 20% share in hand. And it didn't hurt his business that most stockholders were powerful in D.C. So Colfax, Vice President Colfax, the future President Rutherford B. Hayes, and Secretary of Treasury Hugh McCulloch were all involved in the dealings to make sure Cooke had sole propriety over this over this 47 million acres, that he was able to have the sole building contract, that he was the one profiting from it. And one can only imagine, and I'm sure you could dig into it and find out more information about it, but one can only imagine that they were getting rich off of the deal too, because nothing is free. President Ulysses S. Grant was a close friend of Cooke, and he asked only to be paid off. He didn't want to be a shareholder. He just wanted money. So Cooke eventually filed for bankruptcy in 1873 when people became slightly aware of the corporatist scheme. The Northern Pacific was never completed. So finally, with the public became aware of what Cooke of the scheme that Cooke was involved in, and the corruption that was leading to Washington, and they refused to buy the government bonds, even though they went ahead and elected the shareholders that were getting rich. So Rutherford B. Hayes still became president, but whatever. He was only slightly corrupt for the time, I guess. So today we see the same old tricks and scams. The Democrats are all in bed with the tech industry, and Republicans are still pushing industrial age employment. We talked about AOC introducing the Green New Deal, but at best, the Green New Deal would just redirect preferential treatment from the old gas, coal, and nuclear energies to solar and wind. They're still going to come to your property, demand you rebuild homes and businesses to their new specs. They want to prop up their wind and solar buddies and their energy, buddies, and subsidize them and make sure they get all the good contracts. It's not going to be the average Joe getting the contract. You're not even going to have a say in what kind of specifications your property has to meet if they ever go through with this. Now, I know the Green New Deal was officially voted down the other day, but you gotta wonder, like, was this just them testing the waters? Was this just them throwing the most extreme example out there so that the people reacted to it, and when they come back with a half measure, the people are like, okay, well, at least it's not the Green New Deal. At least we only have to do half of what the Green New Deal subscribed as the solution to the problem. Is that what's going on? I would kind of imagine that's probably what's happening and what they're doing. You got subsidies for air travel, subsidies for light rail. The taxpayer would be on the hook for enriching and subsidizing industries, whether they use them or not. And this is the way subsidies work. This is why the fight against government-run healthcare is so important. Because you shouldn't be required to pay for something that you're not using. If you, and a responsible human being, a responsible adult, is there to take care of their family and to enrich their family. Not corporations, not somebody else's family, by force. If you are to be a responsible adult in the world, it is your duty to do what you have to do to take care of your family. And if you have extra and you wish to give voluntarily to others to assist them, then that's up to you. But to force people to provide services for other people is, as is said many times, it's theft, but it's worse than theft because it's extortion. And if you refuse to pay these people, they will throw you in jail. Eventually, they are coming for you. They may not come tomorrow, they may not come the next day, but eventually they will come for you. And the only way to control these people is for a vast majority of Americans. Maybe not, probably not even a majority. I would say a good 10 to 15% of Americans just said, no, we're not paying you. We're working on our own system under the table, away from you, away from your fiat currency, outside of your entire scheme. It would just destroy the power of the federal government. Unfortunately, the government has convinced the citizens of the country that they have the space to imprison the entire country if people refuse to pay. But they can't imprison everybody. They can't do it. The numbers when it comes to dealing with the government, the numbers are on the sides of the citizens. And if the citizens tell the government, no, we're not giving you more power. We're not going to allow your corporatist schemes of the 1850s to continue into 2019, into 2020. We're not going to allow this. We're going to put a halt. We're going to put a stop to your corruption and your propping up and stealing of freedoms. We're not going to put up with it anymore. And that's all it takes, is enough people to just say no. Now, I've often said that politics is that space between government action and freedom. And where government acts, there is no freedom. Democrats and Republicans alike are being lobbied, bribed, blackmailed, and manipulated to steal more from the taxpayers to prop up their corporate cronies, writing regulations to limit competition to these few that can pay their bribes and offer future riches and investments to those charged with they're offering. I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly. That they're telling you out of one side of their face that they're representing the workers, and out of the other side of their face, they're going before the bankers in Wall Street, and they're saying, "Oh, just like Hillary Clinton said, well, we have to say one thing in public and one thing in private, right?" That's how it goes. Everybody knows this is what's happening, yet somehow you still end up identifying as or with these politicians, and I'm a Trump supporter, or AOC is God, or whatever, man. And it's really disturbing that there's such this, I guess it's cognitive dissonance, I guess is the right word, where it's like you choose your team and it's everybody else but your team. It's everybody else but your guy. And it's like, no, man, they're all doing it. Every one of them. Every one of them's doing it. You know, the ridiculous idea that there were no scandals under the Obama administration. I hear all the time. Oh, his only scandal was he wore a tan suit. Really? Yeah. Because he wasn't drone bombing weddings or funerals. He didn't send the CIA in to create this catastrophe in Libya. There's no slave trade in Libya now because of U.S. foreign policy. He didn't continue the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. He didn't run the Fast and the Furious. You know, he wasn't targeting people using the IRS to go after his political opponents. Yeah, none of those things happened. Yet, somehow, people just choose not to see it. And it's the same thing with Trump supporters. They choose not to see it. And the whole point of this exercise, going through this book, The Progressive Era, is to show you that both parties are part of the results of what happened in the Progressive Era. There's no such thing as a party that adheres to the Constitution. There's no such thing. It doesn't happen. You know, the closest thing we had to that was Ron Paul in 2012. 2008, 2012. I think he ran in 1988. But that was the closest thing we had to somebody who really adhered to the Constitution. You have like a Justin Amash or a Thomas Massey who are pretty good on specific things. But they're still in the middle of this machine. And they do pretty good about at least appearing to stay out of these corrupt type of situations. And my friend Pete Raymond, Mance Raider, from Free Man Beyond the Wall did a podcast with a lobbyist who discussed how they went through DC, and they don't discriminate. They're not like, oh, we're paying the Republicans or we're paying the Democrats. No, the only people they stay away from are the people like Justin Amash and Thomas Massey. Everybody else is on the take. Everybody else. Every single one of them. And the chances of you finding a politician and electing somebody else, electing a politician like a Thomas Massey or a Justin Amash that stays true to their principles and who they are, even after they get into the belly of the beast up there in Washington, is slim to none. Because most people just, when they get up there, the first thing they say is, oh, I see how this works. And I'm going to have to give a little in order to get a little. And before you know, they're giving a little more and a little more and a little more and a little more. And they've lost their entire fucking soul. They've lost it. They are now part of the machine. They are just another cog in the machine, taking their bribes and lying to their constituents. As we work through the progressive era, I hope that you take the time to reflect on what's happening today based upon what Rothbard was writing and speaking about back then, in that we're able to draw parallels together and figure out and new ways to explain to people that this is not how we have to live. And as long as we're allowing this corruption and these things to go on, we are choosing to allow that. And we need more people standing up. We need more podcasts. We need more blogs. We need more journalists that are out there calling attention to this corruption and to these scandals. That is going to be the show for the day. That was Chapter 1, Part 1 of the Progressive Era. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.
Go back to bed, America. Your government has figured out how it all transpired. Go back to bed, America. Your government is in control again.